All right, here we go. It always says it's going live and then it takes its time. Awesome. But it says that we are now live. Thank you all for coming and let me know if it gets glitchy. But otherwise, what the hell is up with elephant trunks? Um, it's kind of a weird question. It wasn't something I was anticipating talking about, but I'm really, really excited today to be talking about elephant trunks, conservation. What else? Well, what about elephant trunks? Yeah.
In undergrad, I did a senior design project on creating a dolphin blowhole simulator, and so we were trying to mimic what dolphins and kind of them projecting water. So when I was looking at projects, I wanted to do something that was non-traditional. So what I do is I do different experiments at the Zoo Atlanta or the Atlanta Zoo. Oh, suffering a little bit, but I do research at the Zoo Atlanta, and what we're doing is we're trying to understand how elephants are able to move their trunks. So they can do different things. So they use their trunks to eat, drink, to actually discipline their young. So mothers will use their trunks like a belt to actually kind of whip their young in the wild. And so we're doing different tasks, like we've looked at how elephants can pick up tortilla chips and elephants wrapping around like a barbell to see how much they can weight, almost like an elephant gym. And what this applies to is looking at robots. So soft robots are these robotic manipulators that are able to do different tasks without having the hard metal joints. And elephant trunks are a pretty common example of that. So that's a little bit about elephant trunks that I do. In terms of conservation, I teach a class at Georgia Tech. I'm a graduate student there on the science and engineering of animal conservation. So it's about bringing non-biology STEM majors together to work on different conservation projects. So we work with Burmese pythons, gorillas, and elephants and pandas actually right now. So we have a bunch of different projects going on. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. So that's super cool. It says like the video is buffering weird, which of course it is. Let's see. The NDI, so people are already on and very excited to hear about what you're doing. Um, Let me see as we're going if I can play around with stuff. Everyone who's watching
Okay.
is like, this person should never be here. Um, but we do still have audio. And so, I mean, this might be one of the first ones that ends up being audio. We keep getting that question. So, anyway, I want to know a little bit more about how you got interested in this project, and I also, I want to let people know a little bit more of what your background is. So, your information is up on the screen, but you're a graduate student at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where you're looking at specifically the physics of elephant trunks. How did you get into this?
Yeah, so I was a mechanical engineering undergraduate, and I really didn't like a lot of the traditional mechanical engineering type of classes and roles. And so when I was looking at graduate school, I wanted to do something that was surrounded with just something different. I didn't want to be building like a tank or doing thermodynamics. That just was not stuff I was interested in. So I just did the whole sort of looked at a bunch of different schools when I was applying, and my advisor, Dr. David, who has done a lot of non-traditional type of biomechanics, or the more common term is like biolocomotion, which is how animals move, and that for me is I went to South Africa with my mom in about 10 years ago. Geez, 10 years ago now. About 10 years ago, and I got to go in the wild for the first time, and I fell in love with elephants there. So there's actually this picture I found like last month of me when I was, I think, like 12 years old, and I was just this fat little chunky kid. But it that was when I first fell in love with wildlife, and so when I found a project of working with elephants to look at how their trunks move, it just sounded like a really, really interesting project for me. So that's how I got into it, and so now I'm part of what's called the physics systems group at Georgia Tech, and so that's kind of how I got involved. But it really was not what I was expecting. Like 2 years ago, this is not what I thought I would be doing. Oh, I didn't really even know if I wanted to go to graduate school. I was super unsure, and so I ended up taking a fifth year, and just kind of all fell a little bit into place, and then finally moved to Atlanta. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So that's really interesting. You've got this whole background of uh, just getting excited about this different stuff, and kind of what do you want to be doing with this? What is somebody who works on elephant trunks? What are you thinking about going towards next?
So when I first started my project, it didn't have a lot of conservation ties. So one of the things I've wanted to do with my research is tie it a lot more into conservation. So there's different models and things like that that are looking at when are elephants going to be extinct in the wild, and we've seen their population go decrease by 90% in the last 100 years, and a lot of that's due to poaching, to human-elephant conflict, and this is both with African Asian elephants. And so what I've tried to do is in the last 2 years is continue to do this project, but also do a little bit more on the conservation side. So what I want to do with this project specifically is I want to end up going in becoming a faculty member, but I want to teach people that are in these non-traditional roles about conservation because a big problem that we have in America is we do something called westernization of conservation, where we look at the problems that we have and we immediately try and apply it to the places where these species are. And so, a really, really common example is quite a few, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, there was this video of, or a picture story of elephants getting drunk on corn wine. And I'm sure some people watching saw like the picture of elephants passed out. And it was like this funny sort of go lucky article about, oh, this is cool, elephants did this rating. And but if you think about it, that's something that we get and we're like, oh, look how cute those are. But if your livelihood is dependent on this sort of farm, and then you have these 10,000-pound animals that can eat 200 pounds of food in a day, all eat all of your family's livelihood for a year, it's not very funny. And so this is kind of one of the things that has sparked my passion for conservation. And so that's what I want to do and continue doing is still do some of this elephant trunk research as well as looking at other animals, but also the conservation tie. And there's some different groups and nonprofits that are working on this and help support this kind of dual mission of doing research that is also conservation focused.
Wow, wow.
So,
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead. We've got some really good questions, especially coming in through Instagram. So, which, and before I keep going, so you've got your handle there, GA Tech _ Andrew. Are you comfortable after all this if people reach out to you, ask more questions,
yeah,
etc.?
that's fine.
Awesome. All
Yeah,
right. So let's see. Wow, we have a lot of questions. Um, so,
rapid fire.
yeah. Okay, fine. We're going to start with one that's really just interesting. It just says, can the trunk suck up water like a straw? This is LYDEV 33. So can it just drink water with its...
Yeah, so there's a really awesome human wildlife conflict researcher, Lynn Von Hagen, who's a PhD student at Auburn, and she's looking at human wildlife conflict. But she shared this picture of elephants in the wild, a lot of times in springs, like a water spring.
Hmm.
and we had the elephant suck them up. And using high-speed cameras, we could actually see how fast the seeds were moving and also the volume that they're able to do. Yeah, so elephants use their trunk to drink water, and so they'll suck the water almost 2 meters high in their trunk and spit it back out of their mouth. But it's funny. There's these really cute pictures that people can find. Is if you just put if you see baby elephants, a lot of times they have their entire heads in the water because it takes
Hmm.
them quite a few months to learn how to use their trunk, so they can't actually suck. They they literally basically dip their whole entire heads in so they can actually drink.
Oh, oh no.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
how
really
long
cute.
does it, so it takes them a few months to figure that out? They just sort of like drown themselves?
Yeah, so observationally, this has not been like I don't think there's hard science of it's on the 33rd day of the third month. But it's more of I think like 6 to 8 months would probably be my estimate of how long it takes, and that's just what I've heard for African elephants. I'm not sure in terms of Asian elephants.
Huh. Okay. All right. So,
So yes, they do. Short answer.
okay. Okay. So, what we've established is that the baby elephants are just going to stick their heads underwater and they'll just figure it
Yeah.
out from there. Okay. All right. Um, so, I have another question, which is from, oh, wow. It's so cool. Okay. So, Sarah White at the PhD Princess sent in four questions in a row.
Okay.
And the main one that she wanted to ask about was do they have snot and how similar and different is it to human mucus?
Yes, they do, and it's great because when they like get to know you and like so their snot's all throughout their trunk. So there's a lot of these uh, people are like, oh yeah, I'm just covered in water. But if an elephant is like coming up to you and like smelling you or something like that, all of the stuff that gets on you is their mucus. I would say it's thicker than I haven't done an actual comparison, but yes, they have snot and it lines the center of their trunks. So
Okay. So how does that affect how they can drink water? I guess we have mucus in our throats, right?
yeah, so I don't think so. I mean, we can't. What's really important when we're doing all this research is we keep the animals in mind and uh, the best and most safe experiments we can. So I don't think it would be safe to remove um, any of the mucus, but I don't think it relates a lot. It might help with that, but they also use, so we've talked about sucking up water, they also suck up food. So there's this really cool experiment we did where elephants can actually pick up tortilla chips without breaking them.
Hmm.
And what they do is they'll hover the tip of their trunk about a centimeter above the chip, and then they use suction to vacuum the chip up to their trunk so they can grab it.
Hmm.
So they're able to move a bunch of different fluids throughout their trunk.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Okay, so that's I did not know that. I kind of just assumed they didn't. Um, okay, and that kind of answers her next one, which I think was related. Said, "What kind of junk do they have in their trunk?" But then her next one, I know Sarah White, and she's lovely, so that's why we're really pushing for her. How does their sense of smell compare to ours?
So it's really interesting. In South Africa, they noticed that there was these places where uh, landmines were from, I think, previous wars or conflicts, and elephants would never go around those areas. So what the place that I do research with in South Africa is Adventures with the Elephants, and they did a research study where they could actually teach elephants to sniff TNT at a better accuracy than dogs. So if you gauge like um, their sniffing abilities, it's a lot better than humans. And one of the research experiments that we're trying to do is actually gauge how accurate their sense of smell is. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of uh, I don't know. There's a lot of debate right now of how good elephants are at seeing, and so I think the only information people have is through deceased elephant eye dissections, and
Oh,
this is a little out of my wheelhouse, but the like amount of sensory neurons that are inside the eye can correlate with the amount or the what like your ability to see well, and so they think elephants have a lot better olfaction. So they're amazing, which is really weird because it's kind of, if you think of their olfactory like nerves for helping them smell are not in the trunk, so they're all the way in the head. So when they sniff something, they kind of have this super long tube
Hmm.
that they have to um, sniff with. So they have a really remarkable sense of smell, but people are not familiar with exactly how they're able to sense something that's super far away. So if you're
Hmm.
interested in learning more, um, there's a faculty member out of Hunter's College in New York, Plotnik, Plotnik, and he's done these really cool experiments with Asian elephants where he's actually found that elephants can smell quantity. So they can go up to, he did an experiment where he had two buckets and one was filled with more food, and they're able to actually figure out which one has more food just through olfaction or sniffing.
Hmm.
So,
Huh. That's so interesting. My dog just walked over too. He must have heard me thinking about dogs. But I really had never thought about how, yeah, you've got this super long tube. It makes me think of Elephant. Did you ever play that when you were a kid?
I'm not, maybe
Oh man, if you didn't, I need to find some way to like send you this game. It's this thing
you
where you
should.
you fill this little plastic elephant with butterflies and you turn on this huge fan and it shoots butterflies out of its nose. And I have not thought about that game in a very long time.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well, so I saw, I think a question on Twitter was asking about, I mean, some of the first, there's a bunch of old myths and things like that that have talked about, mice getting into elephants' trunks and bothering them. And as far as I know, that's never happened. But the whole elephants are afraid of mice is not actually, um, I don't believe is actually true. The only evidence we have that is that true evidence is, so MythBusters did something where they showed a elephant being afraid of mice, but I'm pretty sure it's just something that surprises them.
hmm,
But it is also possible the mouse is exerting some sort of uh, frequency of like sound that the elephant is really not interested in.
huh,
So
that's so interesting.
yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to ask this question because I do have a question in Instagram that someone just kind of made a joke about on YouTube,
Okay.
where Costanza on YouTube says you're not talking about genitalia this time. And what's great is that Aaron Alcala, who was one of our recent guests, actually asked, "Are elephant trunks more like limbs or genitalia? Is this a thing that you know anything about?"
Yeah. So
What? Wait,
so
wait, wait,
what
wait.
elephant trunks?
I did not expect there to be an answer. Okay.
So yeah. So elephants are called these things called muscular hydrostats. So it's a purely muscular appendage. So genitalia is not actually the best comparison for humans. What the best comparison is actually our tongues. So these muscular hydrostats, they're a muscle that has no bone or cartilage. So the common examples are mammalian mammal tongues, some reptile and amphibian tongues, some are super funky, and elephant trunks. And so what they're able to do is they can obey conservation of volume when they move around. So yeah, that comparison is made quite a bit.
Hmm. Wow, that was not at all what I was expecting, but that's great. Okay. Well, that's hilarious. Okay. So I've got Afra Carl asking, is it true that it's used for greetings? Like, do they actually do the really cute thing in Dumbo where they like wrap their trunks around each other or say hi?
Yeah, so they do like a trunk shake when they see each other. What the one of the most interesting things though is called an elephant reunion. So when a herd has been separated by somehow, some way for some period of time, so like part of the herd is gone and they come together, they'll do this thing called a reunion, just like a family reunion, and they all trumpet and and they do the rumbles and they all urinate and defecate at the exact same time. I have witnessed one. It was one of the
Oh.
most. um, interesting experiences I've ever had. Because you're not really prepared for it. It's like it looks. Imagine the scene of Lion King, like the circle of life scene as they're like going in, and all the elephants are trumpeting, and then that is what's happening. But at the same time, all of them are pooping and peeing.
That would have really ruined that movie for me.
Yeah,
Wow.
I hope that does not ruin Lion King for you,
I
Jen.
mean, unless they make a horrible new redo, I think I'm okay.
Yeah, they're just gonna make every reunion like it is in the
Oh
wild,
no. I
and
mean,
yeah.
yeah, that would be a really bummer Lion King anyway. I don't think it even matters with the elephants. Like if we went way too honest on that. Um, okay. So everyone wants to know about snot. It's great. All right. Let's see. 3-1 dot says, how did the elephants evolve to have a trunk instead of, say, a more sophisticated arm? I've had like a couple questions of that. There was another one that was just like,
Yes.
why don't they have an arm?
So So I believe that. Oh man, I'm gonna get my biology chops tested, and this is gonna. But so proboscidae is what? So elephants, the only other animal that's similar to them that has kind of this trunk like it's called
Mhm.
proboscis is the fancy word is tapirs. Tapirs.
Hmm.
They're. I mean, it's pronounced in like 7 or 8 different ways. I'm not sure evolutionarily why they have developed that. One of the really difficult parts of the development is obviously it's completely muscle,
Huh.
right? So when we're looking at uh, osteological or like bone samples, they don't really right? There's not really any of the trunk that's usually preserved.
Uh-huh.
There was, I believe, a mammoth found in the Arctic that had some of the muscle uh, preserved. But I do know a major difference between African and Asian elephants is African elephants have 2 fingers on the end of their trunk that are that they can manipulate. So it's kind of like having an opposable thumb. And then Asian elephants, the bottom finger is actually all cartilage. So they can't actually move it around. So they can only do a little bit of wrapping. And I believe behaviorally that is for African elephants need to grasp more, like high reaching. So you see like the elephants on their hind legs, high reaching trees and branches.
Hmm.
And that's uh, a divergence in the evolution. But I'm not really sure on why they have it and not an arm. It is a really really interesting question, but I mean they use it for quite literally everything. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, but I mean, that's sort of the idea of or of evolution, right? Is that it just has to be good
Yeah.
enough. And I guess if I was going to say something really weird, because it's sort of like a tongue. And I was like, if you had, you know, two thumbs and everything to go, but really, their other
Yeah, it's
arms
like
aren't
it's like
better.
an elongated tongue, right?
Yeah.
Like so sloth bears have those super super long tongues, or anteaters have really really long tongues, and I mean these things are have evolved because of what they eat, and obviously so it's actually a kind of a big tragedy of so we were talking about water, and so if an elephant's gets a elephant in the trunk gets an injury, so like a hole goes through from like a
Oh
gunshot
no.
or something else from like a trap goes through one of their nostrils, they're not actually able to make the vacuum of drinking water. So it's a lot of times very difficult for elephants that have an injury like that to live
Hmm.
because they can't actually get water unless they, like a baby has to do, dunk their whole head up to that level. It's kind of like a beer. Like if you puncture a beer on the side, if you've ever played beer darts, right? It fills to that point, and
Yeah.
so they have to dunk their head all the way. But a lot of places in Africa where there's droughts or there's not high standing water, that's really, really difficult to get access to. So it's,
Oh,
yeah.
that's so sad. Um, So I guess we'll ask another sad one, and then we'll get into the preservation side. So
Okay.
Daniel Yavaneras, there we go, says, how sensitive to pain are the elephant trunks? So, and I think that kind of goes over another one of Sarah's questions is Uh, she asked, how much can they deadlift? So this goes back to that main
Yeah,
question,
so
right? That like they're super strong, but they're also really sensitive. What's going on there?
that's one of the things that we're looking at. So I'll start with the strength question. So surprisingly, we found doing experiments. So we actually put like a squat rack bar, a Smith machine in front of an elephant, and just through wrapping, so wrapping their trunk around, they can only pick up about 60 kilograms or about 135 pounds, give or take. So a bar with um, a 45-pound weight. But when they're using their whole head, neck, body, I mean, they can push down trees that have been reported to be 1,000 pounds. I
Huh.
mean, fully grown bush elephant that's a male that's mad basically can't be stopped by anything. It's probably a 14,000 pound, 12-foot charging bull. Yeah, it's not a lot going to stop that.
Wow.
Uh, and so that's the kind of lifting side. So how sensitive are their trunks, or are elephants? So one of the things it's really cool that I've gotten to do is I've gotten to help with taking some different dissections of a frozen elephant trunk. So I've been able to take some skin samples as well as some hair samples. So we're looking at if elephant trunks have vibrissae or whiskers is the fancy word, and we believe that's how they're able to sense around their trunk because they have these really, really long, thick hairs along their trunk that they're able to whisk or uh, they're able to whisk around to actually feel around
Hmm.
them. But with that being said, that is like how we think they can sense. But when we were doing I haven't done a lot of anatomy, but when we were doing the dissection, we broke several scalpel blades just trying to cut through the skin. So they can actually feel things very, very accurately. I mean, I can if you tap one on the side of their skin, they're able to feel
Hmm.
it. But at the same time, actually going through the skin takes quite a bit um, of sharpness, and that's why some of the traps and yeah, that stuff's sad. But
Yeah. So I mean, it's I think I have this idea in my head. It's like there's this very dichotomous idea that somehow elephants are like these incredibly gentle, beautiful creatures that we need to protect, and then the other side is like this is the most terrifying like
yeah,
creature
so
thing ever.
one is the Western definition and one is the African definition, or not all. But so when you think of elephants, right, they're these beautiful, and they really are like they're beautiful, they're majestic. They're one of the sexy species of these super large terrestrial mammals. I mean, I was talking with some people on a call, and the just the large terrestrial animals everybody loves, right? Like everybody loves big cats, and people love elephants, and people love giraffes. But uh, in our perspective, that is what an elephant is, right? Is it's this thing that's just beautiful, majestic. We've seen it on Lion King. But if you are a family farmer and you you spend all of your money on a bunch of crops, and a herd of elephants comes in and eats it, and a bull destroys the fence that you spent, and you have no money left over, it kind of destroys your livelihood.
Mm,
So it's really easy to say, hey, support elephant conservation. But then when you're in Africa and somebody's all of their life's work have been destroyed by an elephant in a night, it's not as easy to say, well, hey, you should protect this and not, shoot it or hurt it or
hmm.
and that's a big difficulty
Hmm.
is this communication between them, and that's kind of what I was talking about in the beginning of this westernization of these techniques. And one of the it's not a problem, one of the difficulties is, and I was talking with Lynn, who does a lot of field work with human elephant conflicts. That's Lynn von Hagen, and you can look her on Twitter. She has beautiful pictures of elephants, but she and I were talking about how every region in Africa, different things work differently for trying to keep elephants off your property. So let's say you're in southern
Mm.
Africa and chili fences, which are what farmers will do, is they'll soak their fence line or like ropes in motor oil mixed with chilies, and elephants don't like the smell of that,
Yeah.
and it works really well. But then if you're in Eastern Africa, that might be like elephants love that,
Hmm.
right? And so then if you do put chili fences up, they'll immediately come in and eat all of your
Oh,
crops.
wow.
So this is part of the difficulty of finding a solution for human elephant conflict and
Hmm.
elephant conservation is every single place in Africa that has African elephants is different. And there's
Mm.
just now a third subspecies. So there's African forest elephants and African bush
Hmm.
elephants, which are different. And so there's three subspecies species.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but but
Huh.
yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting. And I guess it makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes sense too that, yeah, it's one thing to say we want conservation, we want all the animals to live and be happy. But there's also the reality that there's people living there, and we can argue
Mhm.
about what human activities can and how they disrupt natural ecosystems all around the world. We can ask like what is the purpose of these conservation efforts, and there's so many questions that I have no expertise in. I know that you're really interested in the conservation. So where do you see some of this going, or what are the big problems that you're facing right now?
So so there's a few things. So the thing I guess I'll start with is what's the most important in these conservation projects is me not doing it. So and what I mean by that is
Hmm.
the local population are the people that know the most about these. So one of the most important parts is this conservation education,
Hmm.
and if I'm going and doing field work in South Africa, I need to be working with the communities there on their conservation projects. So the me coming in as this white Southerner and just doing research and then leaving
Hmm.
is traditionally what has happened a lot in the past. Is so somebody will come, oh yeah, I got all my research, okay, I'll leave, instead of really investing their time in the conservation projects in that area. So the goal of this research, right, is to have some education programs and some things that we can talk about. And unfortunately, unfortunately, it's again this weird. Elephants are just so smart. One thing doesn't really work, right?
Mm.
If you think of scarecrow might scare one bird species away, but there's I would say
Mm.
tens, if not hundreds, of techniques people use to try and keep elephants off their property, and that stuff doesn't work. So
Huh.
what we're trying to do is come up with different solutions to that. And I mean, elephants are super important for a lot of other wildlife just across Africa as well. So it's not just elephants, but it's the whole biodiversity of both Africa and Asia. And these are, I mean, it's just it's a difficult thing. I think there's forgetting what country it is, but one of the countries, the leading cause of death in farmers is suicide,
Hmm.
and a large part of that is due to elephant crop breeding. And so there's a lot of difficulty, but
Wow.
my hope is that conservation education um, also needs to be present here. And so also telling people about how everything is not a simple fix, how this is not going to be overnight, how elephants are not, I mean, they are these wonderful creatures, but it's a more complicated story.
Hmm.
And talking to people, so like the class I teach right now is computer scientists, mechanical engineers, and electrical engineers.
Wow.
None of them even really knew what conservation was. And in that class we talk about everything from um, conservation of elephants to elimination of like Burmese pythons in the Florida Everglades.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that conservation can actually be helping as well as destroying populations, I
Mm.
guess,
Hmm.
is is a way. But yeah, that was.
No, I mean, I think that's super interesting because this is I love getting to do the Ask Me I'm a Scientist stuff because I talk about things that I've never really had to think about before. And it's really interesting to me that you do both this hardcore, physics, biomechanics, all of that side, and this research sounds incredible. And I really enjoy the idea of measuring how much water goes through an elephant's trunk. Um, and then this other side that's, you're digging into the conservation, the ecology, the just complex interactions. And I really appreciate what you said about that it needs to be done by the right people. I do have a
Well,
question. Oh,
yeah.
I was just going to say, so when you sent in your stuff and I saw your profiles and things, I saw you with pictures of elephants. Do you ever get people who ask you questions about that? Because I know, yeah.
Yeah, so there was so Skype a Scientist is an amazing science communication resource.
Hmm.
And uh there my point of saying that is this week or last week, all these weeks are running together. Emojine did this thing about Tiger King
Yes.
and the what was it called? Everything wrong with Tiger King. And so what's important is in these. So the place I was in those pictures with was Adventures with Elephants, and I was working with elephants that those are the elephants that were trained to smell TNT, and those elephants are able to. They're free roaming. They have their own land, but they're able to help us with the experiments to test a human elephant conflict solution. So um, we can be around, we can observe them, and in these observations, we're able to not put anybody in harm's way, the elephants or us, when trying a different and new sort of technique. So my I have gotten things.
Hmm.
They've a lot of times been from, and the reason I brought uh, Imogene in this is she talks about the difference between animal welfare and animal rights.
Mm.
I stand with what she talked about, where I'm an animal welfare advocate, and there's a big kind of difference a lot of times in the arguments between animal welfare and animal rights of this. So I mean that's kind of my take on that. But yeah, I have gotten pushback. The research I do is going to, and this is part of why I want to do the conservation side, is going to help the species, and I'm not sure to what
Hmm.
level of help that is, but that's something that I know, and that's kind of why I really liked getting into this, is because I felt like doing this is making a difference, and I felt it was a little bit of a injustice, not injustice, but is working on this, working with an animal on, okay, let's try and design robotics, and this animal's endangered. And so, why am I not talking anything about the conservation of the species? And
Mm.
I think that's something that's really important is if you're working on a species that is on the IUCN Red List or is endangered in any way, I think you owe it to your research to also be focusing on what are some of the human or non-human conflicts that have led to those. So, and I know a lot of people that are studying different apes and things like that are big uh, advocates for talking about reduction of palm oil
Mm.
and effective and these sort of things. And it's important to have both things in mind when you're doing your research, because if not, to me a lot of that is the I'm going to that place,
Hmm.
I'm getting all the research that I need, and then I'm leaving.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's sort of a opportunistic situation, right? Of everything exists for me, and I can go in and learn stuff and hop out. So no, I think that's
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how you do it, to be totally honest. I love working with plants and bacteria, and a big part of that is I don't have to have as many of those kind of introspective moments. And so that's really
Well,
cool.
but to be honest, from following you on social media, you have to deal with your own different sort of things. So I mean, right?
Yes.
So this is a big challenge in science in general right now is, uh, and it's why people coming and giving these the what's been really hard for me, and I've
Mm,
talked to my parents about this as I'm home, is there's so much miscommunication on these different. So like talking about animal welfare and animal rights is when a TV show like Tiger King comes out, there's all of this sort of positive press on these for these different cha- characters, and it makes things really, really
mm,
difficult because then, okay, so we're working really, really hard, but then if we try and counteract some of this discussion, it just ends up kind of blowing back on you, and
mm.
that's where you can't deal with the trolls or just you get a
Yeah.
you get a troll army coming after you, and that's there's part of that, but in the end, I know my work is gratifying, and it's like
Mm,
one big benefits of graduate school because there's so many difficulties of graduate school but the research and the class and these things are the things that I really, really love,
mm.
and that's kind of what keeps me going.
Oh, that's such a cool way to end. So I always ask this last question, and usually it just gives me something to Google afterwards. But what are you most interested in learning about this topic, about either conservation or biomechanics or both? What are you Googling? What are you excited about?
What am I excited
I
about?
know. I've started not telling
Oh,
people.
okay. No. So for one of the things I'm really, really excited about for uh, I mean, this is just so conservation, and so a lot of conservation projects in general. This sounds really cheesy, but I think drones are actually going to become this very useful. I don't know anything about drones. I'm not a aerospace person, but people in South Africa have, I think, University of Cape Town have started using drones to track rhinos at night to identify
Hmm.
poachers. So they don't actually need any humans, and you can obviously cover so much more fence line.
Hmm.
So just to give some perspective of, hey, if you're trying to take care of some rhinos or some elephants at night, well, you might be walking and then the animal that you're trying to protect or something like that ends up turning on you,
Hmm.
and you can't really do a lot,
Hmm.
especially if it's like a starving lion. And so I think this is gonna my hope is that we will get more advanced technology in that regard that will be able to actually
Hmm.
help. I think in the United States right now they're using drones for like tornadoes,
Hmm.
to locate tornadoes and kind of doing some of the same image recognition. And I think that's kind of the new thing in conservation is image recognition, and it's the same thing in everywhere like machine learning
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. But I think that's what interests me right now. That's what's Googleable.
So I am 100% going to Google that. I do know there's some stuff in like conservation, Antarctic stuff with penguins, where you can go in and count how many penguins there are and cute things like that. But
Yeah, but that's really hard
yeah.
because is when you're doing a so with a census it's really easy.
Mm,
And a census is okay, so let me send this to you, but if you're in the wild and you
mm,
see 75 elephants in 2 days, how many elephants was that?
mm,
Right? And maybe one time they were covered in mud and one time they weren't covered in mud. And so this is a big
mm,
problem with some of the is it's like, oh, well, we have this many animals are left in the wild, but it might be half that, it might be twice that, it might be so increasing the amount of knowledge
mm,
we have about how many animals of a given species are actually present will also help us figure out how to do species conservation, because
mm,
there's several stories of, well, this amphibian lives by streams, which was an observation like made like 30 years
Hmm.
ago, and then everybody's trying to find them in streams for 60
Hmm.
years, and then somebody actually finds that they're in a grasslands, and so they were searching for the wrong place the whole time. So image recognition and these sort of new technologies hopefully will help us with these animal census and helping with different species conservation, and it can impact around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like one of those things that is going to impact a bunch of different fields. That whatever's good for elephant conservation using drones is going to be good for a lot of other types of conservation and a lot of other research. So it's where a bunch of different scientists can hopefully come together. And I hope that there's a lot more people like you who are not just working on science that covers a lot, but no, I mean, there's that. It's easy. Well, it's one thing to get a bunch of scientists together, but it's another to find scientists who are willing to do more than they have to for their research. So, yeah, I just want to thank you for hopping on here, and I'll let you know now. This will probably be our first audio thing. So we ended up keeping. I'll cut this out. We ended up keeping the video going, and it turned out to work fine. But one of the things that people have been repeatedly asking me is if I could just pull down the audio and put it up as a podcast. They're like, you don't need to do anything to it.
Yeah, on like SoundCloud or something like that.
Exactly. So I'm probably going to do that, but you are just an absolute champ with putting up with this stuff. And
Oh, it's I can't I the only thing I see is I see your little circle in the middle, so I don't know how
uh,
things are actually going. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, no, it's super cool. I know a lot of other people have questions. But unfortunately, I didn't just like speak extremely rapidly because there's so many great questions. But I'm going to send them over to you. So again, your handle is GA
Yeah.
Tech, so like Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's just God Tech. So literally my Twitter has, as I've moved from place to place, it was K State, OK State, God Tech underscore Andrew. It's so unoriginal.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, I
awesome.
need to, yeah, I need to figure something out. But thank you so much.
Oh,
This has been so much fun. Have fun on Drunk Science tomorrow.
yes,
Um,
yes.
that should be really exciting. So it's cool to kind of officially meet some of the people that I've
Yeah,
known on
you
Twitter
know,
for a while.
yeah, yeah. It's always
Yeah.
a weird feeling, but next time we chat, you can actually see my video and, meet my dogs and whatever. So, and maybe you can have elephants with you, and I can meet your elephants. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I can introduce you to Kelly, Tara, and Masholo. So they're pretty good. I miss them so much. They're all in Atlanta, and
oh,
then there's all seven of the ones in Bella Limpopo, South Africa. So yeah, yeah, I miss them. I have to deal with my two dogs here instead of they're a lot easier to deal with and a lot smaller.
yeah,
So
but not the same. Luckily, no, that's that. I don't want two elephants, but all right, Andrew, you're fantastic. Thank you again so much.
thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
and good luck with everything, and congrats on finishing up your PhD.
Thank
So.
you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to cut back over. Thank you to everyone who hung in there with us. This was a really fun episode, and I loved that this kind of had that crossover between research and also just passion. We can be excited as scientists about what we're learning about all of these different pieces of science and data and presentation, but to take it to that next level of understanding where our work fits in the world and how we can hopefully benefit the world instead of just taking from it. I think it's something that we should all kind of keep in mind. So, again, this is Ask Me, I'm a Scientist. My name is Susanna Harris. You can follow me, ask questions, do all the things. But until next time, go learn something new. Go Google drones and elephants. I don't know. Go have fun. All right. Bye, everybody.